Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for trusting the process. I've been doing a lot of these, and there's a system that we use, so it sort of is as productive as possible. It's called the EPIC system. There are 4 steps: equalization, personalization, information gathering, and then collaboration. I'll go through all of them, but it's very sort of clear. But the idea here is that, as often happens in America, we see news and then we divide. And the problem is we don't really cross paths because in our lives we don't see each other. And then on our phones, we don't cross each other information wise. And so the idea of doing this is actively to say, how can I bring people that may not actively cross paths to have a conversation about what's actually happening now? But the first thing is we are not going to talk about race first, because if you focus on the thing you have the least in common first, that ends up affecting the whole conversation. So what we do first is equalization, which is talk about something that has nothing to do with race, but allows us to actually get to know each other. So I'm going to ask you deeply probing personal questions. The first one being, I want to hear the name and the description of your favorite stuffed animal when you were a child. I want to know, who was that stuffed animal? And if there are 5, just choose one. We need to focus on one. Mine was a duck named Sunshine. It was a very big duck. And I got Sunshine from a family friend on my birthday, and it was maybe 3 feet tall, and I was 3 feet tall. And I carried Sunshine everywhere, and what I would do is I would give Sunshine the bed, and I would tuck him in, and then I would sleep on the floor. And my mom got really mad about that, because she said I did not work hard to buy a bed for your duck to sleep in it. So I had a hard time understanding that Sunshine did not deserve a bed. So that was mine. So Nathan, tell me about your stuffed animal.
Well, I would say it'd be this little stuffed wolf. He had like a keychain thing on his head that I got at a trip somewhere when I was in my teenage years, and I still have him somewhere. He's around here. He goes with me on every trip. I got him on a trip, and now he goes on every trip. He's a little stuffed wolf, gray wolf.
Do you take photos of him in different locations?
I don't. I'm not a picture guy, so.
Okay.
I'm always the one like, oh, we should have taken pictures of this event or this thing, but I never think of it.
What was your wolf's name? What is the wolf's name? Sorry, present tense.
I think it was Fang at first. I don't remember, White, because of the book White Fang or something.
Okay.
Growing up.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Charlotte, what have you got for us?
I'm sure I probably had some stuffed animals, and I'm sure probably one of them was a horse. I don't know of any names that that come to mind, but
okay, yeah, so describe the horse. Describe the horse. Let's hear about the horse. We know about the wolf. We know about the duck.
Well, I'm sure it was probably black, because I was really into the Black Stallion series as a kid, and so that's probably the best I got.
Okay. And Michelle, what have you got?
I have 2.
Okay.
I'm gonna show my age, which, yeah, I'm just so old. But it was a Teddy Ruxpin. Do you remember Teddy Ruxpin?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Mouth moved. Like, for whatever reason, I loved that thing to death. Like, I played the cassette tapes over and over till it was destroyed. And then later on, I got a Roger Rabbit. And to this day, I still have Roger Rabbit. And he slept with me. I took him everywhere. He's like dirty. But my mother actually still has it. But aww. Yeah, those were my two little buddies, I guess.
And now here's my question with Teddy Ruxpin. If you were put in like Madonna or Cyndi Lauper as a cassette, would he move his lips to Madonna?
No, as a kid, you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. But I think his lips just went up and down.
Yeah. I didn't know if he would literally get into like each song and you'd see Teddy Ruxpin like. I wanted one so bad. I wanted one so badly.
Yeah, that was a big deal for Christmas. The Teddy.
It's a big one. So personalization. The idea of that is that, we don't know each other. And the problem is that when we don't know each other, we start sort of sizing each other up. So rather than doing that, just focus on something else. The personalization, and this is how I sort of wanted to begin this, and it will be a conversation, is we obviously know what's going on in the news. I would like to start with Michelle to talk a little bit about, out of the news, her own experiences in life, what she's seen and experienced on her own. the problem happens that a lot of us, we turn to sources and we're like, well, I saw this source and I have this source. And at the end of the day, there's a real personal experience that's going on here. So I kind of wanted to start with Michelle. And then ideally the two of you are information gatherers. So you're asking questions to draw out her experience, and then we'll switch and talk about it. But I do want to start at least, because what happens is something happens in America, everyone rallies, and then we quickly divide. So let's go back to sort of, what is it like for you, Michelle, these days, being Black in America? You know, talk a bit about your son, your kids, however you want to do it, but just what are you feeling? What are you seeing in this day and age? Because I would like people to hear that and know what it's like.
Absolutely. The funny thing is, which I'll have to kind of back up a little bit, because I realized it wasn't until I really became a mom that there were so many issues. You know, we hear these things as we grow up about, you know, slavery and segregation, and it gets to a point where it's like, well, when you don't experience it, or maybe you didn't think something was, you know, discriminatory, you know, you kind of just go on with your everyday life. And it's interesting for me because I'm actually, like, by definition, what you would say African American. My mother is from West Africa, Liberia, and she grew up completely different from my growing up, because she actually had a very wealthy family. Liberia was an independent country where it was Black people were in power there. She did not even experience racism until she went to school. She was the only Black girl in a boarding school. My grandfather was a general counsel. She didn't even know what was happening in this country. And she was made aware of it, that she was different at the age of 9. And she was going to the school, people would touch her hair and they would, you know, why is your hair so woolly? And, you know, different things like that. And she said one day they were doing kind of like an autograph thing. And she had a best friend who wrote something in her autograph book. And let me tell you, you can say whatever, I don't get easily offended. So just, I'm an open book when it comes to these things. So
that's important in these discussions, is to not feel fragile. Yeah, yeah.
And so my mom is telling me, you know, this girl wrote this thing in her yearbook, and it said, God made the niggers in the night and forgot to paint them white. And there was a little picture of buckwheat, and my mom had no idea. She thought it was the cutest thing ever. And she goes home and she's like, look what my friend, you know, wrote. They were trying to get a lot of autographs. That was like the point of it. And her parents were so appalled. And here my mom is, this young person who's never experienced, like, you know, racism and things like that, and wondered why it was such a big deal. Her friend ended up getting suspended and all these different things. And this is in England. And so when that happened, it made my mom want to research, well, what is this racism? So when she did finally she became a journalist. She does gospel music. So I was raised in the church. She was very adamant that we were going to know our culture. We were going to be very aware of Black history, and not just the negatives, but also the positives. So even me growing up as a kid, you know, it was very diverse. I had so many different friends from everywhere, but there was always that underlining thought, like, man, you know, these things still kind of happen when I become a mom and I'm, you know, raising kids. What is it that I'm going to have to be sharing with them? And unfortunately, these have been really hard conversations.
Your son just graduated from high school, what, 3 days ago?
Just graduated. That was like the biggest thing with this pandemic, was like, oh my gosh, you know, we're not going to get to see our son, you know, 18 years walk across the stage. And finally, you know, saw him walk across the stage last Friday. And with all this going on, and you're still always going to be mama bear, you know? And I'm like, are you even ready to get out into this world? My son actually not only he's enlisted in the Army, he wants to serve this country, and he wants to be in law enforcement. And so talk about all of the like emotional things to go through at this point. And here's your baby that you raised, and he wants to go into this world when it's not the prettiest right now. When all this was happening, and I mean, I even had, you know, conversations with, you know, old friends of mine saying, like, you know, the conversation you're having with your white child is not the same conversation I'm having with my Black sons, and now daughter as well. So it hasn't been the easy. I think we almost think like, oh, it was so long ago. We didn't have to, we're not going to deal with this, but it's so real. I mean, that's the part where I think, and Riaz, you probably saw some of my Facebook rants. I had to kind of disconnect because I was getting so angry, and I've never been this angry person, but it got to a point like, how many times do we have to see the same thing? And I saw my son, and I'm sure you've probably heard it before, but I saw my son on that ground. And that's where it's like, okay, something's got to give. You don't have to have the same exact, you'll never be able to understand and walk in my shoes, but you can at least acknowledge that there's a problem and it's got to be fixed. So yeah, everything now, my awareness is like heightened just because of my kids. You know, have I had some experiences probably like in the workforce where I felt there was a little, and I'm such an optimistic person. I want everybody to be like, no, you know, I don't want to always throw the race card in there. You know, I see the good before anything else. But, you know, thinking about a lot of just my personal experiences, I'm like, wow, you know, this didn't just disappear. You know, it's definitely still here. And as much as we want to be kumbaya, we have to get real with ourselves. And I feel like at this point, it's us as individuals. You know, we want to cap everything into this organization and these people are doing that, but we got to get to a point where we're checking ourselves.
I think there are almost, and then I'm going to open it up to Charlotte and Nathan. I almost feel like there are a lot of conversations happening, but they get mixed into one. Like, to me, the conversations are, is there a problem? Conversation 1. Why is there a problem? Conversation 2. What do we do about the problem? Conversation 3. And I find that a lot of times people mix them in. That they're like, well, you know, this will happen, and I don't know if that's that's part of it. And the timeline, like I asked you both to watch the 13th, you know, and I do it because it was very illuminating for me connecting the dots. Obviously, towards the end, it gets very political. I hear that, you know, that's a filmmaker choice, but it really lined up things for me in a way that I was like, oh yes, I didn't see how that all connected. And I do remember in the 80s growing up, and it was super predators and crack cocaine, and every night on the Baltimore News, the black teenagers lined up every night, to the point that my dad, an immigrant, we weren't born in America, was afraid of black people because he wasn't afraid of black people because he grew up working in East Africa, in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. He had no problem with black people. He was afraid of American black people because of what he saw on the news. So I guess to Nathan and Charlotte, we'll start with that first part of the conversation is, do you feel like there is a problem? Having seen what you've seen and watched the 13th and hearing, what do you think is the scope of the problem as it is? And then we can discuss why it's there and what to do about it. But Nathan, what do you think when we talk about, when we say, is there a problem?
I mean, again, this is just my experience, but I don't see the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one's explained, like, this is the I guess the term is systematic racism.
Mm-hmm.
Because I will see a diverse law enforcement agency. There's every color under the sun in law enforcement. I have friends and family who are in law enforcement. And I grew up having respect for those people in authority. But obviously with what's going on, there are people who think there is a problem. And so, not to try to be in my own echo chamber, I'm always trying to see what other people are, or listen to what other people are saying.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because I don't see the problem doesn't mean there isn't one.
Sure.
You know, I'm not arrogant to say that because I don't see it, there isn't one. You know, there obviously is for some people, or at least they're perceiving one. What we do about it, that's the question.
So let's say, for example, I think the term systemic racism gets thrown around a lot. When in the 13th, when it said, for example, the punishment, the criminalization of crack cocaine was different than the criminalization of cocaine. And all those people said, and even Newt Gingrich said, that was different.
Right.
That's a perfect example of systemic, that it's built into the laws of the system. So there, you can say, it may not even be the police officer, but the police officer's job to enforce the law says, if you have crack cocaine, aggressed, thrown away in jail. If you come across someone who has cocaine, which by the way, there wasn't that much policing of suburbs in cocaine, the terms and all were very different. That's an example of a system that was in place for many,
Right.
many, many years. Does that make sense
Right.
to you? Does that sort of like, when we talk
No.
about systemic, like that's a very clear example of how it was just different for Black people and white people.
I agree, but I guess my thing is that still in place today? Is there still such a large difference in sentencing between powder and crack?
Well,
I don't know.
I believe that the policing is just, it's different. That because when you have this many years of policing Black people for their crack and their marijuana, the numbers,
Right.
the SWAT teams, the policing of them is much more intense than the policing of white suburbs. It's just so whether it is still the same, although I would say that a lot of Black people are sitting in jail right now because they don't have the money for bail, and that's another systemic thing. Those are all examples of what I think I'm trying to say is the laws are not fair. And that's what I think is a good example, a clear example of systemic.
Yeah.
Charlotte, what do you think about there being a problem or the scope of the problem? Not just from your perspective, because obviously Nathan and Charlotte, you're not Black. It would be very hard for you to say to me, here's the firsthand experience I had, which is why I'm connecting you to Michelle.
Right.
But what do you feel, Charlotte, about the scope of the problem that is out there?
To give you a little background about myself and where I'm coming from, I grew up in rural Missouri. Probably, I think I saw one Black person in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I went to college on campus. My big fear was I'd meet somebody walking down the sidewalk, and I would look down because I didn't want to offend them, and I was afraid that I would do something or say something to offend somebody, and I didn't know how to have that interaction.
Somebody of color, you're saying? Somebody
Yes,
of color?
yes,
Okay, thank
yes.
you. Thank you.
Yes. And so, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I see in law enforcement that there is some examples of police officers who have very aggressive natures about them and like to assert authority. And so I can see that as being a problem. I don't see the other, but like I said, I just don't have very many people in my sphere that used to look at that. So I would say that's where I'm at and what I know and what I've experienced. I know after watching the 13 documentary, there was a lot of information in there I had never heard. And one of the things that
Me too.
I was trying to reconcile with myself is I knew that the crime rate had dropped dramatically over the last couple decades. But it just surprised me. How could crime be dropping and yet this explosion in prison population? It just didn't make sense. And so I've been asking some questions and trying to do some research in that area. And yeah, I see how the mandatory maximum sentencing could have led to that. And I think that may be some of what we're seeing. So I could see that being an issue and needing some addressing. Yeah, I definitely think that there is a problem and we need to be working towards solutions. Just I'm not exactly sure what those solutions necessarily look like.
And we can talk about that, but I feel like the big concern for me is our disagreement / lack of awareness of the problem. And I think things like the difference between sentencing, I didn't know. But the prisons for profit, I didn't know. Redlining all through 60s and 70s and 80s. Black people can't buy homes in certain areas where they can go to good schools. A problem. Couldn't physically buy the house. Couldn't get mortgages. It's when all of it's looked at different angles that we're like, oh, there's something systemic here. It's not just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Now, I would say, I think myself, and I think Michelle too, but I'll let you speak for yourself, are quite conservative friendly in terms of people that we talk to, in terms of voices that I hear and listen to. Lawrence Jones is a great conservative Black voice I really like. John Caldwell. I don't believe that we're coming from the perspective, or at least I'm not coming from the perspective of conservatives bad, wrong, at fault, liberals good, will solve it. That's not our perspective. That's not my perspective, because I don't believe liberals have solved it, to be quite honest with you. So in terms of the politicization of it, I would say I'm trying to get people to step back from that, because we all want to jump into our teams and say, let's not do that yet. Because I don't know, and I don't know if Michelle knows, if the right solutions are conservative or liberal or some mix of both. We certainly can't figure that out till we can talk. But in terms of it being a problem, you know, so many examples of how Black people just can't get a break. Can they pull themselves up? Sure. Is Candace Owens wrong to say, if you don't commit crime, you won't go to jail? Well, technically, yes, but that's a very simplified way to look at it. You know, people don't just turn to crime. There are reasons, there's factors that happen. That's where it becomes a bigger problem. And I think what I would love, you know, Nathan maybe to discuss a bit is when, as we're having these conversations, how much do you feel the conversation is about blame coming at you? And how much do you feel the conversation is about just the problem and you understanding it? Or like, how much do you feel like these conversations about race come at you rather than something that you can participate in?
I don't feel like they're pointed at me specifically, or even just at least my demographic or my, you know, political affiliation. I am more conservative than anything, but when it comes to race, it's not like this is a blacks against conservatives.
Mhm.
I've actually listened to your other two four chairs conversations that you had, and you said something that you have talked to people in Alaska and you've talked to people in like the inner city, and they're both saying we want less government,
Mhm.
but we're saying it in different ways. So, you know, I'm all for that. You know, you know, get them out of our lives and let us live. That's part of the problem, at least that I perceive. Again, I have no personal experience because I'm obviously not black, but I think that's a lot of the problem with, you know, that is coming from black people. You know, they've had the government too much on their throats, on their knee, on their back, figuratively for so long. You know, from what I've perceived, and it's also the same for us conservatives. So yeah, I don't feel like it's pointed at us. I think we may have a different view of how, again, not me specifically, I'm kind of speaking for my side, but we don't agree with how they go about it, maybe in
Well,
their,
well, let's talk
you know.
just for you, because all of us are just going to talk for ourselves. In terms of your seeing how things are unfolding, what is it that you see?
Specifically right now, I see a lot of frustrated uh, black individuals who are protesting the mistreatment from police.
Mhm.
And I see specifically, and I'm not blaming the black people, I see specifically, from what I can see, white people taking over their protests and turning them into Antifa-led looting and burning of the towns, which is going to create more problems for the African American communities, because now they don't have anywhere to shop. You know, I've seen a bunch of videos of elder African Americans saying, "Why are you doing this to us? You're just making it harder for us. You're not doing this for us. You're not part of the solution. You're part of the problem." So that's just my personal take on it.
Michelle, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing in terms of like the protests being taken over or overshadowed, or what are your take on that?
Well, I live in Dallas, so I literally am right down the street from what's happening. Luckily, I happened to be out of town when the first protest that kind of went awry, and overall though, like I had some friends that were there and they said it was so peaceful, but the biggest thing that they noticed out of a lot of the other, things that have come out and, other similar situations like this was the diversity at this time. And they felt like this was the first time where there was, white people that were like, hey, yes, we can't understand how it is, but we saw it with our own two eyes and we see that there's a problem. There clearly is something wrong. And so they were like, we're going to be out there. We're going to protest. We're going to stand in unity so we can at least say, look, there is a problem and we're all seeing it. It's not just Black people out here. It's everybody. The unfortunate part of when these things are so in the media and it's so focused on, negative, people take advantage. The opportunists that are in these protests, they want to loot, they want to tear up the towns. That's the part that I guess frustrates me the most, because I always like to figure out, it's almost like when my kids are fighting. What is the root of the problem? Why are we, how did we get here? We completely lose focus. We forget that we all just witnessed an innocent man get murdered. No, it's look what they're doing. They're destroying their own towns. They're destroying their own city. The narrative completely changes and we never fix the problem. And that's why I'm like, there's so many people that feel like, segregation was, so long ago and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, if you really think about it, those people that grew up in that era, they still exist. And they still are sharing those experiences, whether it's their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. So it's still here. We may feel like, we've come far, but then this happens and it's like, wow, because I have friends that are just in disbelief almost. And then I'm kind of like, how can you be in so much disbelief? And they're like, well, we watched, Trayvon and we heard about Mike Brown. We saw the other guy just the other day, but it still didn't hit him almost until they saw that the guy was complying, it seemed like he was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. So it was almost like this light bulb went off. Like, I don't understand the problem, but I'm going to support my fellow American. And I think that's where this time round, it seemed like, okay, maybe there will be a difference. Maybe people that don't understand, and like you said, you can't relate because you're not Black. But this time, it was such a nationwide thing that we could be on track. But literally, I don't even know what the record was. If it was 24 hours, 72 hours, there it goes. The same narrative that we see each and every time something like this happens.
Which is what's the narrative that we see every single time this happens?
It seems like it always changes to, okay, well, what did that? Well, let's pull up the rap sheet of the Black man. He must have done something to deserve this. Oh, well, then the politics, of course, gets thrown into it. Your side against my side, these other things. And it's just more, I feel like it gets more divided than we like to say we've come so far, but then yet it's like we just took 10 steps back from where we were. I mean, it just gets clouded. And there was something that you had said, to the nature of, us and them. And I even had to have kind of a check with myself where it does take individual accountability. And I feel like this is what this is. Mm-hmm. Like what Riaz is doing is helping us get to that. And it's not going to be overnight. But to say, I think a lot of people feel like, well, I'm just this little ant in this big old world. What can I say? What can I do? It didn't happen to me. Let me stay away from it. So that's them. I believe this. But it really is kind of taking that moment, because I even had to do this, was stepping back, taking away everything that I was ever taught, my beliefs, almost just having deprogrammed myself. And it was more deprogramming myself from social media and everything else, and taking a step back and saying, my foundation of what I know, what is right and wrong. Take away the politics, take away everything. What is right and what is wrong, period. That's where I kind of got into my calming place, and I had to step back into my faith and my beliefs and that's what kind of put me back on kind of centered into being a little bit more understanding and open, because I'll be honest, I was getting angry at my white friends because I was like, how can you not see this? And so I was like, wow, you know, I'm almost doing exactly what, you know, I don't want to be done to me. And so that's when it was like, okay, we really have to get real with ourselves and take self accountability. Let's stop representing for, you know, I don't speak for all Black people. We see that with Candace. You know, but I represent what I know is right and what I know is wrong. And I know I'm raising 3 children to respect and just not even be so caught up in the hype of everything and just trying to be good people at the same time being aware. Because that's the hard part. You want to shelter your children, you want to protect them, but you have to you got to be real. And yes, it's 2020, it's not 1950, and we're still having a similar issue. So I feel like it does break down to us as individuals to start really thinking beyond our boxes that we've been kind of programmed in, whether we were raised by it, whether our beliefs. I mean, I have a friend who always likes to say, you know, I was born in a Catholic family. That's all I knew. All I knew was the Catholic religion. When she got older, she had opportunities to start learning and thinking about things on her own and realized maybe that wasn't for her. And I feel like that's the same thing we have to do when it comes to issues of race. We got to really, watching the 13th was even eye-opening for me. Like, I know what I've been taught and what I've seen, but I was just like, I didn't even realize how deep, you know, it was. So yeah, I understand, you know, where you're coming from, both of you, and the fact that, yeah, you'll never be able to walk in my shoes, but just being like, you know what, I'm going to be open-minded. I'm going to be more aware. I'm not going to continue the, you know, it's us against them, or maybe they don't like us. It could just be like we say, I even try to even tell people all the time, we absolutely cannot put all white people in a box. We can't put all police in a box. But what we can do is see historically that the foundation of our country, unfortunately, there was a moment where white people thought they were more superior than Black people. And we need to go from there and really research and do our due diligence in history to see why this is still happening. It didn't just disappear. And I feel like a lot of my friends feel like it just went away. You know, schools aren't segregated anymore. This isn't happening anymore. And I'm like, you got to be real. We got to be real and put everything else aside and talk about what the issue is. We tend to always want to fade into something else. I mean, we're all in unity not too long ago with, well, I guess we're still dealing with it, with COVID. We're all locked in our houses, you know, all dealing with it. And all it took was one little other issue. And it's like, COVID just disappeared because now it's crazy. It's like, what happened?
Media narratives are powerful things. And the whole system, whether it's a post on Facebook or an edit from CNN or from Breitbart, they're all designed the same way, to get you to click more and then to convert those clicks into purchases. That's how the whole system works. So anything that you like is setting up a precedent of what's going to come down to you. So the problem is that everything gets so blown up, you know, it becomes Colin Kaepernick and take a knee. And I'm like, that was his reaction to the problem. And we never talked about the problem anymore. It was all about the reaction. And the same thing here, these protesters, some are violent, some are not. I appreciate what you said, Nathan, that it seems like it's being commandeered for something. I appreciate that. It is. But then the news, it's so much more interesting to take a video of someone's livelihood being burned down than it is to do the peaceful protesting. You get that. But at a certain point, it's just going to disappear. It's like, oh, peaceful protest. And that's where the protesting and the rioting you sort of get a window into, is that if this was one organized peaceful protest, it would be one part of our evening news and it would be gone. The fact that it's keeping in the news is part of what there is, but the problem is it's keeping in the news by the violence and the rioting, and that's taking away again from the point. Is I believe in my heart, and I am not Black and I am not white. And I have a very unique perspective because I watch this unfold as an immigrant, because I'm neither white, but I get the Blacks' experience of not being the majority, not being white. I relate to that. But I don't understand, I don't relate to being a completely second-class citizen in America, which I believe to a large degree they are. Whether it's their ability to buy houses, education, all that may have changed in the past 10 years, but that's this much compared to a history. You know, there's still a huge disadvantage. And I really do think, Nathan, if for some way we were allowed to make you Black for 48 hours, I think what would surprise you is the air of suspicion and the assumption of criminality that just comes with you as you walk through the world. And that is a big part of the problem. We look at Black men and boys as criminals, something to be concerned about, cross the street. Some of that's true, in fact, but not all Muslims are terrorists. Not all white people are racists. Not all Blacks are thugs, but that carries them. And the problem is when you live in a majority, when you're the minority, I can say it, my experience being an immigrant and being a Muslim, it's very hard to get people to pay attention and for me to say, no, the numbers aren't what you think. I'm telling you, there are 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. There are nations with hundreds of millions of Muslims that you don't hear a single thing that's not peaceful coming out of, but those never make the news. And so that narrative, that media narrative just pushes its way across all of us. And what this is hello, Charlotte, hello, Nathan, hello, Michelle, people, wherever you are. This is what I felt in my life. I am not Black and I'm not a diehard progressive, but I believe there is a grave injustice to the Black community and specifically to the Black man. And I don't know a single Black friend of mine, and I have many, not one, who has not been pulled over, harassed again and again and again and again over the course of their lives. You know, no matter where they go. I have celebrities who are Black, who are pulled over on their way to church because they're driving a nice car. And every day in LA, there's no crime. We're not on the hood. Pull them over, and then reach for your ID. But when you reach for the ID, that creates a situation of movement. So suddenly I was self-defense. He moved. Is it every police officer? No. But when it's bad, it's really bad because those are the people who are supposed to protect you. And if those are the people that have the force to come after you, that's dark stuff. That's where human beings get exterminated. And it's been going on for a long time. We just now have video.
Exactly.
You know, and that's what I think I would like you guys to feel and understand is not it's your fault, not it's but it is, what if Michelle and I what if it is that bad? What if it is that bad for every Black man in America? Maybe not every day, but at some point, maybe one day they won't, but the next day they will. Someone glances, someone checks, someone doubles over in a store, someone follows them, someone tails them, someone asks them, are those shoes real? You know, it's so many ways that we're like, you're still not equal, but you look equalish, you seem equalish. And that's the stuff, maybe not in your hearts, but it's out there. And it's hard, And I want you to feel that Michelle should not have to talk to her children about how not to get shot at by police. Because she doesn't know which police department it's going to be. They could be visiting a friend wherever, in Minneapolis, which none of us knew was a problem. None of us knew until recently that Minneapolis was the problem it was. And yet it is.
And it's crazy because, and I don't know if you guys have children, my son, who's now 18, a few years ago, and I was so frustrated because he didn't share this with me and his dad till after the fact. He was working and he was working late. He was walking home from work. And unfortunately, and it's so crazy that I even have to say, unfortunately, he was wearing a hoodie and he had a backpack on. And right when we live in the suburbs. And so he was coming into the neighborhood and he decided he was just going to run to get home quicker. And sure enough, a police officer stopped him. And as he's even telling me this story, I am terrified. Like, granted, he's standing right in front of me alive to tell me a story, but I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I was like, me and his dad were like, what happened? He said, well, I guess he just was trying to see where I lived. And because I was running and I guess I looked suspicious. And I said, well, unfortunately, you probably do look suspicious running down the street, but at the same time, it was one of those moments too where like there could have been that moment. I literally thought could not be standing in front of myself. I could be standing in front of an officer telling me something had happened. And that's when I was like, okay, we really got to have these conversations more and more. And it's not to freak him out. He did everything he was supposed to do, you know, explain to the officer he lives down the street. He had his ID in his pocket. Eventually, you know, the officer let him go home. But it's one of those things. And again, I don't think all cops are bad. When most of the experiences that I've had with authority, you know, they've been good experiences. There's been some that were questionable because, again, I'm the type of person, I don't want to just throw the race card every time. But there was a situation where I got pulled over, and it was a very nice neighborhood, and all my kids were in the car, and he actually asked me to step out of the car. And I was just going to the park. I didn't have my purse and didn't realize I didn't have my ID on me. So he asked me to step out of the car. He said he ran my name, and his only issue was he didn't believe I was giving him the right name. And I was kind of like, why wouldn't I give you the right name? I have bills in my car, I can show you. And he was like, I'm just gonna ask you one more time. Tell me the truth, because I know you have kids in the car. Is the name you're giving me your real name? And at first I was just like, unless there was an incident and they're looking for somebody, this is just the most weird thing ever. It's my real name. I have no issue to lie. I will give you whatever it is that you need. And you know, he let me go, gave me a ticket for not having identification. And even in that moment, because my kids were terrified because they didn't know what was happening. Now mom's getting out the car. Why does she have to get out of the car? And even in that moment, it was one of those things too. I'm like, wow, because I wasn't doing anything. I didn't run a red light. I wasn't speeding, nothing. And I was like, it was just, you don't even want to chalk it up to racism. Like that's how much like I want to feel like we've come far, but it's like, man, that one just didn't seem right. Like why did that go down that way? And then I end up getting a ticket for not ID, which I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing on the street. But like having those experiences and then having to explain to your kids, and you know, your kids are so innocent and they don't get like, my son, when he was my youngest son, he was like, even when I was explaining to him things, he was just like, so you mean to tell me people didn't like us because we're brown? And when a child says something like that, it's like,
yeah,
it shouldn't be because of my melanin. It shouldn't be because of my skin tone. And like, unfortunately, yeah, it is. So it's one of those things too, just growing up, having to like have these conversations, and it's a different type of fear that it's like, there's gotta be a moment where you may not have kids, but to know maybe your fear is them just getting kidnapped. Well, my fear is them getting kidnapped, my daughter being raped, and them just being judged because they're Black.
Nathan, Charlotte, what are your, when she shares that, what are your thoughts? What are your reactions to that?
I can kind of relate to, in a small way. I am a card carrying concealed carrier, and in the state of Missouri, you have two different IDs: your driver's license and then your carry concealed license. And I make sure that my carry license is not directly behind my driver's license, so that if I pull out my driver's license to give to the police officer, he can't see the carry license and get scared. You know, that's always my thought. And you know, I always make sure my hands are on the steering wheel so they can see what's happening, and so I can kind of relate in a small way.
It's the policing, it's the watching, it's the judging. Harvard did a study, Harvard Business School, that resumes that have Black sounding names got called back, I think 60 or 50% less. You know, it's in our system. Like it's so many ways that we just don't see them as equal. And again, maybe not in your hearts, but in loan officers and police officers and people hiring, and in so many ways. And the only way, again, because you're white, to understand this is to is to listen to someone and say, look, I'm not making this up. And what I appreciate about Michelle is she's not, to me, a friend who's like, I lead with my blackness, and people could do that. That's fine, but that's not. It's Michelle. And it still comes up, and it still worries her about her son, because if a George Zimmerman had been in that neighborhood and he thought that the guy wearing a hoodie happened to be running from the scene of something, the nightmare scenario for Black parents is very scary. And I don't know a single parent friend of mine who doesn't have kids who's not utterly terrified of what will happen with the wrong interaction with the police. And again, not everyone, but certain police departments, it's rampant. It's rampant. Nathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel for Michelle. I have a son too. He's 4, so I've not got that issues yet
Mm,
of him running through the dark
yeah.
down the street. But I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's you're not running down the street. You're running through cornfields. Um, so, but yeah, I mean that's a got to be a frightening situation. Like that should not be the way the world is. Unfortunately, it is. Uh, yeah, I've had to interact with police because I like to drive. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, we know
And
what you mean. We know what you mean.
yeah, yeah. I don't want to incriminate myself too much, but I like to drive, and I've had police interactions, and same as uh, um,
Michelle.
same deal. Like I get pulled over, and I gotta keep my hands on the steering wheel. Officer, what do you want me to do? My license is over here. You know, can I grab it? Or I grab it before he even comes to the window. But then you're moving in the car, and then he suspects that. Um, but I realize that's not the same experience that
Mhm.
I would have if I was Black. I realize that I'm not, uh, oblivious to that fact.
I appreciate you saying
Yeah,
that, by the
and
way.
that's something that I, yeah, I personally don't agree with the way uh, people are treated. I was raised to treat everyone with kindness and respect, and to love everyone. We're all, I believe we're all children of God, and made in His image. So that means if you treat someone like a second class citizen, you're treating God's creation as second class citizens.
Mhm.
God doesn't make junk. At least I believe that, and I believe when I was growing up and being taught in school about Martin Luther King and his speech that a man should be judged by the content of his character and not the color of the skin. I wholeheartedly believe that. If someone is a crappy person, they're a crappy person. I don't care what color they are. If someone's a good person, they're a good person.
Well, there's an interesting
It's
segue there, because Martin Luther King, which I agree with you, was also on the police and FBI's most wanted lists, and was
yeah,
actively sought out by police forces overseen by the FBI to get rid of him. And I think
right.
we had one of these conversations, and someone, I haven't posted this one yet, said, why don't you have a great leader? And I was like, that's why Black Lives Matter exists, because there is no face to it. Because if there was a face to it, they'd probably get killed. So
And
Black Lives Matter in its nature says we don't have visual leaders because we know what happens to them.
and that's a connection I made through the 13th movie, whatever the title is,
Yeah.
13th documentary. Um, that's the connection I made between the Black Lives Matter movement and what happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yes.
With all of their people who are trying to lead, through that, talking about Malcolm X and Anita Davis. And I actually, thanks to Netflix autoplay, ended up watching the interview with the director and Oprah,
Oprah. Yeah.
and it just automatically started into that, and I watched that whole thing, and yeah, how all those people were targeted. Again, I don't agree with it. That's just a product of that um, thinking that blacks are less than whites, and I don't agree with that. But yeah, I don't agree with the charter on the Black Lives Matter website, but I agree with the message they're trying to promote. But yeah,
I think that's valid. I think that's valid. I think, I think that the organization itself exists for a reason and what their specific demands are. Like, you have people talking about defunding the police, which doesn't necessarily mean no police. They mean dismantling it, remantling it. They did a good example of this in Camden, New Jersey, dismantling the police, where they sort of redid it in an interesting way. It's worth looking into. But the dismantling the police is being received on the right like Trump telling people to drink bleach on the left. Like, it's a huge, like, I don't think we're talking about there being no police. That's not what's being said. It's dismantling the way it works. Like, Trump wasn't saying, go drink your bleach, and everyone was like, bleach. And I'm like, it's the same thing. It's being lost in the ridiculousness, is that there is in certain police departments a need to really dismantle the way it works and reorganize it. Again, Camden, New Jersey did a really good job of this, but I don't think I know anyone who's saying no police. We just don't want police around. Like, Michelle.
Because I had to kind of disconnect from like TV and social media for a moment. And when I did kind of like start, I was like, what is this whole defund the police? What does this even mean? And I'm like, whoa, we still need, authority in our communities. Like, who are we calling? Ghostbusters doesn't exist. Like, what's going on? And so, I did get to kind of briefly look over how New Jersey was doing it. And one of the things that just in kind of doing like research and digging and just really kind of like going into that place of like, man, how can I be a part of the solution versus the problem? One of the biggest things, and it all ties down to relationships. When you really think about it, like, there has always been a problem with, in certain Black communities, the relationship between the police and the relationship with the Black community. And so, and even from like in my family, and it was crazy because I even had seen it where, they're talking about, a family member that got incarcerated, and instead of like educating the kid that, this person got incarcerated because he did something bad, it was more or less, well, it's because the police don't like us type of thing, And so, like, even in our communities, there's this fear that they're the bad guy. They don't help. But when we have these two different organizations that haven't even been able to build relationships with one another, haven't really got to understand, and it more or less seems like it's always discipline, and there's no grace, there's no love, there's no wanting to even get to know the other side. It creates this division. And when I was reading about how New Jersey did it, it looked like it was like this more community focused thing. They said that when they have a new recruit come in, that person actually has to go knock on the neighborhood's door, like, so they get to know each other and know where each other stand. And it became this more feeling of, it was the community that ran the community, but they were all working together to build and protect. And, I like to make sure there's facts, but I mean, even looking at some of their numbers and things like that, it seemed like crime had gone down. They restructured and they retrained, and they had programs to learn how to de-escalate situations, not add to it. So that I'm all about, but just taking it away and like, hell with police. I'm like, time out here. Let's talk about this. Let's break this down.
Because if we're talking about a history of 3 strikes, you're out. We're talking about a history of policing for profit, prisons that are for profit. The whole model of what a police station was, and these are the worst ones we're talking about, of policing crime and getting people in and filling the cells, like, that's outdated. It does need a different model. And I think in New Jersey, they said 1 out of every 4 of their, it was Camden, 1 out of every 4 of their police officers is on the new force. But it was just a restructuring, because in certain places it's so bad and it's corrupt from the very bottom to the very top, even sometimes reaching up to the FBI. And so it's sort of like no one can get a fair shake in that. but again, it's not every police department, but some are just have tons of issues. And it's even, I find a lot of people look at like the facts. They're like, well, there weren't that many police deaths, and I'm like, okay, it's very hard to explain that facts are great if you assume a certain amount of humanity. Like if the police officer had gotten off of George Floyd's neck a minute earlier, that wouldn't have been a statistic of any kind. It would have been just something that happened somewhere, but it wouldn't have been a statistic. And if you go to, as far back as Los Angeles in the 1990s, there was horrific police brutality, which of course no one could catch because we didn't have these. Then with Rodney King, you had an actual cameraman who happened to be across the street with his own camera, record the thing, it's all there, and then what they do is they take him to trial, but move the trial from LA to Simi Valley, which is all but 3% white, and that's where you're like, wait a minute, at first we didn't have the evidence, even though I think the, who was it? It was saying that there were an average of 55 complaints of police brutality a week in the 90s. But there's no video, you couldn't show it. Then you show the video and the trial gets moved and you're like, wait a second, why can't we get a fair shake anywhere? And so-
and that's dramatic that we keep.
So a lot of people, the brutality, the harassment, that's not statistics you can see. And again, that wasn't in statistics. Harassment is not a statistic. The things that where you get beaten and all, it's not a statistic. So statistics are useful, but it's also important to have these kinds of conversations about experiential evidence, because again, if the guy had stepped off George Floyd's neck a minute earlier, that would have been terrifying for him, his family, everyone watching, but it wouldn't have been a statistic.
Didn't even think about it like that. Yeah.
Statistics
part two bothers me a lot, because in the height of it, I think that's where I kind of went off. Somebody, like literally, had just happened. We're all seeing this video, and posts start coming in, and somebody had posted, well, there's more, white killings than there are black killings when it comes to the police. And it was just one of those moments where I felt like, wow, even though we see this happening right in front of us, we still want to it was almost like, let's just not acknowledge, like, okay, yes, that's and let's make it clear. There's evil black people, there's evil white people, Hispanic people, Asian people. There are people who are evil in every culture. When we talk about like American history and the foundation of it, it's ugly. It's not all pretty butterflies. There was a time where we were segregated, coloreds here, whites here, and people just feel like, well, no, it doesn't happen now. But let me tell you what the real problem is. It's not black and white. And I feel like for people to just think it's not like this color issue and it's just, okay, it's just a few, and yes, it's a few bad apples here, a few bad apples there. But it's like, here's these two communities. I don't know if y'all have seen it, where literally somebody put side by side pictures that were happening basically in the 1950s, 60s, police and black people, and then the most current pictures. And they were eerie, almost the same. And so it was like, how can you not, I get you, there's things that happen. And then I also question, well, where did you get your statistics from? But to just continue to throw statistics and not just step back for a moment and say, maybe there is, or maybe, that's what just kind of like, we're not ever going to get from this because we're caught up in our numbers. Well, what statistically it looks like is that you're right and I'm wrong and you don't know what you're talking about. And this is just all imaginary. And this is just a isolated incident again.
Because it's a voting year.
And I've heard that one too.
I mean, I would say the biggest win for me of these conversations is that people say, oh yeah, it's a big problem. Again, not everyone, not every police department, but it's really hard for a community to try and better themselves and move up when it's like, jobs are not there, welfare is not there, they couldn't get mortgages, they're harassed. Like it goes into a lot of ways. And a lot of the study I was talking about, Harvard and black sounding names, was done like 2 years ago. So it's not, again, from the 1960s. And we're talking about Fortune 500 companies. We're talking about big companies. They're just not given a fair shake. And I think that's what I find it's very hard for white people to admit. And by white people, I say majority. If you and I were talking about something in Saudi Arabia, I'd be the majority and all you people would be the minority. So it's not inherent whiteness. The whiteness of it is because this country was built on a system of apartheid. That I was talking to someone the other day, and again, I'm neither black nor white. And I was saying, if you're looking at America's prosperity, let's say post-World War II, when it became the industrial powerhouse of the world, and really one of the most powerful countries in the world, all that manufacturing, all of that built America in the beginning is built on a slightly shady labor force. Like, you can get really far ahead really quickly if you have slaves. You can do that. And even the way that blacks were treated in the war, that you can't vote, but you still have to go fight. And you have to go now to Italy. And you have, in so many ways, they have just never been given a fair shake. And I think what this moment is about is saying, as a majority, I may not have all the facts. I may not have all the statistics. But if they're saying for this long that it's a problem, what if they're right? What if they're right? And I think really, we could go around and I would say, I am very happy that I am not a black man living in America today, because I think it would be very, very, very hard. And I think that's, one sec, we have an interesting, quick. We have a quick interruption.
Oh my God.
The TV guy, yeah, hang on. She's shy. Okay, what happened to the TV?
Oh my goodness.
Okay, go. Thank you. My husband is on the front line. He runs a nursing home. So for 3.5 months, I have been alone with 2 toddlers that are 3 and 4. They just turned 3 and 4. They were actually 2 and 3 when this started. And it is, 6 days a week, I'm on my own. Anyway, the point being, what if in your heart, in your mind, you can say, what if the problem is bigger than I think it is? Maybe you won't know how big it is, but if it really does suck to be black a lot of the time, to be American, then that's where I want people's heart to go, is what could I do? Not how do I negate the problem, how do I take on their sources, all that could be true, but in moments like this is, what if it is bigger than I know? What if it does dodge them a lot more on a daily basis than I may think or realize because I don't have the experience? You know, Charlotte, what do you think when I say that? Because either way, it's a leap of faith. Either you leap the faith to say, I'm not going to believe you, or you leap the faith to say, I'm going to believe you. Both, you don't have the experience, you're not black. So both are leaps. Which way are you thinking of leaping?
Well, I want to first off just say that, Michelle, as somebody that lives in Flyover Nation, I feel I understand when people say, I don't feel like I'm being heard. I feel that myself.
That is valid.
In a lot of ways.
That is valid.
And so I can tell you that I'm listening. For what that is worth. I am listening. We probably won't agree on a lot of things, but I am listening and I do care, and you have value to me. And I want to do what I can to make this country and this world a better place for everybody.
Wow.
And whatever that may be.
Or Charlotte's.
That's
I was gonna...
Yeah, now you, Nate. Now you go. What do you got?
I'm not nearly as eloquent or anything. Might not be the smartest guy in the room either, or girl. But yeah, I'm in this because I want to say what like what you said, Riaz. I don't know how big the problem is, but I'm hearing that it's a big problem. So I'm obviously gonna listen and see what it is, how I can help, what needs to be done, that kind of thing. Because yeah, I was raised to make whatever you have better. You know, the life you've got, make it better for not only you but the people you're leaving behind. And and yeah, it's one of those, what's going on and what needs to be done.
You want
Sorry,
a
I've got
better
allergies. I'm a wreck this time of year, so I'm sniffling a lot. Ugh.
Your thoughts?
this is how it starts. I feel like we've been so at tug of war, kind of. Everybody wants to be right, everybody wants to be heard, everybody wants their point to come across. And we're not hearing each other, we're not understanding it. And Nathan, you had said, you're a believer. And honestly, if I did not hold down and go back and like take a step back to like my beliefs and faith and God and love, and we love each other and all those things, I probably would be out there making a lot of mistakes under my Blackness. This is how it starts though. Like, Charlotte, we don't want to force anybody to understand, because you don't, but the fact that you're just willing to like listen and be like, well, what can I do? No, the quote that I saw somebody post the other day, it said, you may not have created the problem, but you can be a part of creating the solution. And
Right.
it was so great to even see, like, even the comments, and some of my friends who are just so like hardcore, their beliefs and politics and everything else, and they're like, okay, I can dig that. And I feel like maybe that is what it is too. Maybe this generation feels like, well, we didn't, we weren't a part of slavery, we weren't a part of segregation, like, why is this now our issue? And it's like, well, if you love your brother, if you love your neighbor, it is your issue. And whether or not it's, you're out there protesting, or you're having these conversations, like those things, I think maybe sometimes people think they don't mean a lot, but this means the greatest to me. Like, being able to talk openly and transparently, because I want to understand your thought process. I want to understand the way that you were raised, and then maybe figure out, okay, well, I get that, I understand that, and vice versa. And I think we're not able to have these conversations because something else is thrown into it. Politics gets involved, everything else, versus like, okay, let's just start, we're and make this a human, we're all humans here. Like, here's a person in our own society that's saying, hey, we need help, just listen.
And
So
I think part of the listening comes from, if you happen to live in a place, not a lot of Black people, you don't have a lot of Black friends, you don't have a lot of Black coworkers, then totally, thank you. But then I think the onus is to then really give the weight to what they say. And again, yes, there's Candace Owens, yes, there's other opinions, but that is absolutely the minority. And again, I do like conservative thought. I think it's helpful to have different approaches to different solutions. But I've looked at Candace with her 70 million views, and I'm like, anybody who doesn't want to think there's a problem now has a Black voice telling them that there isn't a problem. And I've just heard too many friends for too long, for too many decades in college and high school, and I've heard it too often to say it's not. In her experience, it may not be. I mean, she grew up in Connecticut. She's a woman. It's different. It's different. She can have her opinions. That's great. But I don't think she speaks for the Black man of inner city when she's from Connecticut and she's a woman. It would be like me talking to you about something in Pakistan. I came here very young. My parents very consciously raised me to be as American as possible. I don't even speak my own language because they were afraid we'd have accents. So as a result, I'm much more familiar in a Caucasian world, more British than American, because my parents grew up during the British Raj, where the British were in charge of everything. I grew up having tea every day, reading British books. My husband is white and British, because that's how I relate. But if someone were to say to me, Riaz, you talk about something of the plight of the woman in Pakistan, I would have to say, I am Pakistani, that is true. I have opinions, that is true. But my life experiences are not on the same page with the people that you're asking about. And that's where I feel like with Candace in particular, it's just different. Again, her perspective on solutions, fine. But to negate that there is a problem, to me, is just like, oh, no. I've heard this for decades.
And yeah, definitely doesn't speak for me. But just, and I didn't, again, I kind of disconnected, and then I get on and I have all these videos and messages, and, you know, I listened to what she had to say, again, her opinion. But it's almost like it's one of those things trying to say like police brutality is a myth. And I literally think I laughed out loud, because I'm like, here's someone who just wants to kind of bury things under the rug. I almost, again, my opinion, feel it's like this opportunistic a moment too, in something that's such a historic issue, to make it seem like we're just kind of making this up in our head, and just because we look the same, that there's some type of truth to it, and she stands for all. And again, that's her take. And it's kind of unfortunate too that, like you said, so many views and so many people have shared this and feel like, oh, well, here's someone just like yourself, look what they're saying, you need to listen to her. And it's like, maybe she hasn't had those experiences. Even in the little research that, you know, I did do, you know, apparently there was an issue maybe back in the day that she was racially discriminated, and now she is where her thought process is. But again, we all have different walks. But the one thing that will never help the situation is just adding more fuel to the fire, the rhetoric and everything else, the agendas. Like, we never get to, I feel like we always get to the wheel, the circle of chasing, like, okay, well, let's blame the media, let's blame this person, let's blame that person. Well, no, they're just thinking that way. Oh, you shouldn't, you know. And I don't ever want, I'm not, and I'm definitely not raising my kids to blame the system. Yes, they have opportunities. Yes, they need to be good citizens and work hard. But there is, unfortunately, where I live and where they are from, that their real reality is, before they may open their mouth to speak, they're judged because of their skin tone. And it's unfortunate. And I understand if you're not around it, if you're not aware, just like you said, Riaz, you know, I'm not going to understand or maybe connect with your culture because I'm not around it. That doesn't mean, if you're telling me that there's an issue within it, that, oh, it's just non-existence because I didn't experience it.
Yeah.
So, this is what it takes, though, for change to happen. And like you said, Charlotte, like, you don't see a lot of, you know, brown girls or brown men around you. So you can relate in a sense of just some of the personal moments that you've had, whether it's with police or, you know, other people, but there is a difference. And I was telling my friends the other day, I felt like if there was an incident that happened and my son was there and his son was there, all eyeballs would be on my son probably first, sadly, versus his child. So I think too, and Nathan, like you said, you have this impressionable 4-year-old that's going to grow up. And I even took a step back and I'm like, man, what are our children thinking of us right now? They're seeing all this so closely right now. Like, they all have phones. Now we just can't hide it. Like, it's not like we just have one TV and we can only, you know, we only watch this at a certain time. I mean, they have their own phones. They have their friends that are talking about it. Cause I was even like, what are your friends thinking? Like, all your friends are 18. Like, I was talking about, like, what are they thinking that's happening right now? And they, you know, most of their things are like, they think this is really stupid. But when they start digging deep and them doing their research, they just, to them, they don't understand that this could have even happened here because we're so diverse, you know, we seem to be so kumbaya. So I think it's one of those moments too, where we have to be careful because now here's this other generation that is looking at us like, oh, so this is how we operate. Is this how we do it? You know, you got to pick a side, so it's one of those scary moments too, that I feel like we're kind of forgetting we have an audience, and they're listening. And what we do next from this is really what's going to change things. Because if what was 100 years ago and this is still happening, clearly we have some work to do.
Yeah. Last thoughts. I mean, it's that's sort of the whole thing. Last thoughts from you guys, Nathan, Charlotte. What are you taking away from this?
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this in the first place is I really feel like we have forgotten as a society how to have conversations with each other. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity. And I'm going to take the skills that I have learned, the epic that you've been talking about, and I want to try to apply that into my life and to continue on having more conversations.
Wait, let's see if Nathan's come back. I think that's so key, because I find that, Nathan, are you there? Or we lost you. Where are you?
Pop back up.
For a second, I'm back. I got freaked out a little bit.
Did you leave in the middle of our conversation? That is the worst thing
Not
to do.
intentionally. Not intentionally.
Racist.
Not intentionally.
Racist.
You want us to see him tearing up. It's okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate that. Nathan, if we still have you connected, I think he's frozen. Wanted to know what your last take was.
I was very happy to be invited to this. I've watched you and Glenn Beck do a big discussion, and then a couple of your other discussions. I really wanted to get some more perspective from someone who's not a rural Pennsylvanian white person. You know, someone who's not me. I've definitely for the last few years been trying to make sure that I'm not in an echo chamber. So even though I may perceive something the way the world is, that doesn't mean that's the way it is for everyone else. And so I was very honored whenever the Riaz reached out and said, "Hey, you know, I have an opening." And I was like, "Yes, I may not be an eloquent speaker, but I definitely want to be here to listen and learn and converse."
What are you taking from this? And again, I'm not looking for right, wrong. I'm not going, but what is it that's you may not have known or something? I always want to know. My favorite thing when people say in my conversations is, I didn't know that. Like, oh, I hadn't heard that. Like, I'll throw out one for you guys. Look up Black Wall Street. Look up this event in history, Black Wall Street. That's never taught. But Nathan, what are you taking? Sorry, I'm calling you Nathan, but it's Nathaniel. Am I short?
Nathan's fine. Nathan's good.
Okay, Nathan.
Nathan's good. No, I'm taking away basically that there's still struggle, and that there's a long history that has not been kind to all Americans, and even though I didn't know about it, doesn't mean I can't do something about it. I can at least empathize with Michelle and others like her. Some of my friends who coworkers who are Black. Yeah, just the understanding perspective is what I'm trying to gain and take away.
I found, and this system and the way of doing this comes from years of having these conversations, that if we get into conversations and I show you stats and you show me stats and I show you an article from here and you show me an article from here, we never get to know each other. Like none of that information or facts or statistics or FBI or Department of Labor has anything to do with actually us and the way we live our lives. And what's missing is I've been through this. I've been like, if we do a future one about anti-Muslim sentiment, I'll share. You know, it happens. Do I love America? Of course. Do I think that most people I meet are good? Yes. But so many times I've met people who are like, oh, I didn't even know about that. And I'm like, how did you not know about that? And then I'm like, these things make us think we're informed to the second. But whole narratives, whole stories, whole sections are left out. And if we don't start talking, did you hear that? Because I heard this. Did you hear this? What did you hear? Then we're in trouble because we start drifting apart. And then eventually the news story, when we get into like deep fake videos, have Michelle seeming like she's saying, I hate all white people. I hate them. Even though Michelle never said that, because that's what's coming to us. So if we don't start talking, and you have the ability to call Michelle and say like, wait, did you say that? So as your parting gift, you will all be connected in a group chat. And what happens, and I've done now, this is my 5th, is these chat threads just keep going. I saw this. Did you take a look at this? This came across. Have you seen? It is fantastic to see. So I'll connect you all in a chat thread as things come up. This article came up. Did you see this? I just want you to know that you have a bridge to each other, obviously to me, but it can get very loud in our own rooms. So reach out and say, did you see this? I heard this perspective. What do you think of this? All of the chat threads I've done so far light up all day long. Because they're just like, what about this? I watched this documentary. You should see this documentary. It was really good. So your parting gift is I will connect you all in a chat thread so you can continue the conversation. But I thank you deeply for your trust and for your willingness to step outside of yourselves, all of you, and say, I want to listen. I want to hear someone's human experience. And that's what we're doing here. So thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I wish you all take care of yourselves, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.